Welcome back. You're listening to the Flow Sports Hour on Flow FM. I'm joined for this next segment by Bill Harrigan. Bill is the General Manager and the Tournament Director of Oztag Australia. Great to have you on the show, Bill. Thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure, Dan.
Bill, I'm sure there are lots of people listening going, what is Oztag? So let's start with the basics. Tell us exactly what is the sport of Oztag?
So probably the easiest way to explain, if you know the game of rugby league and it's tackle, Oztag is the same game, except we have tags on the side of our shorts which are attached with Velcro, and to simulate a tackle, you take the tag off. So it becomes a non-tackling version of rugby league. Other people say, oh, it's like touch. Well, yeah, there's probably similar. You've got rugby league tackle, you've got touch, and then you've got Oztag, and they're probably the three versions of the rugby league game.
All right, certainly a good alternative to rugby league, especially for people not wanting to get into a heavily contact sport and cop too many knocks. And Bill, give us a bit of a history lesson. How long has Oztag been played in Australia, and what sort of a journey has the sport taken to get where it is today?
Yeah, last year we had our 30th anniversary. So if we just go back around 32 years ago, it was an idea by the founder, Perry Haddock, who used to play rugby league first grade with Illawarra, Cronulla and St George. And he was coaching the third grade at St George at the time, and he just wanted to think, how can I come up with something in training which lessens the contact of my players but still gets them working their skills on running into holes and all that sort of thing. And that's how he came up with the idea. I lived around the corner, and with my background as a referee, he came around to me and said, can you help me write these rules? I've got this idea. It's confidential. And 2 years later, the game started and it was being played. And then I joined him in 2003 after I retired from refereeing as his general manager. And back then we had around 25,000 players. We're up around 150, 180,000 now, depending on the season, summer or winter, from under sixes right through to we've got blokes in their 70s still playing. And that's how it all started.
There we go. Well, that's a fascinating backstory, and it's almost similar to the creation of the sport of basketball. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with how that sport was created, but it was basically to keep players for other sports fit during the winter in Canada because it was too cold outside to play their outdoor sports. So they created something that they could play indoors to keep fit. So there's almost a similar sort of a journey there. And like you said, there's as many as 180,000 participants playing Oztag in comps around Australia, and from your website, more than 80 associations as well. And that is a much more substantial number than I would have thought, probably because I'm from South Australia and there's maybe not as much of a footprint here, being that we're an AFL state here. Would you say that's accurate? Are the rugby league states or the rugby states, full stop, New South Wales and Queensland, probably home to the most participants?
Yes, it is. This is where it's very big. New South Wales, Queensland, very popular sport. Most people, I think if you stop 10 people on the street, 7 or 8 of them, if you said, what is Oztag, they would know what it is. We go back 20 years ago, and you probably only get 3 out of 10. That's how much the sport has grown, and even if you're not a fan of playing it, you're aware of it, where people go, oh, yeah, that's that game where they run around with the tags, like footy. And so it's big in New South Wales, Queensland. We do have a couple of competitions running down in Victoria. And we've got ones in Western Australia. We used to be, for over 20 years, playing in South Australia with a nice little boutique comp over there. But that's fallen over because the guys that were running it said enough is enough for us after 20 years. And unfortunately, nobody was over there to say, hey, listen, I'll take it on. But it's very hard, as you said, because you're AFL orientated. And it's just very difficult for those areas to get it up and running when they're competing so much with a very popular sport in AFL.
Absolutely, and especially with the introduction of more social forms of AFL, like AFL 9s, and for anyone who lives in Adelaide or South Australia, they may be aware of AFL Max, which is the sort of indoor iteration started by former Geelong and Adelaide player James Podsiadly. But with those iterations, I think for anyone who's not familiar with Oztag, they may be hearing this and thinking it's sort of an unserious and fun version of rugby by that same logic, but that's not really the case, is it? So can you contextualise how seriously Oztag is taken and how much it actually means to those participating in it?
Yeah, well, it all started out playing recreational. So you come down, Monday night, Tuesday night with your mates playing a game of 40 minutes of playing tag. But we've also created pathways along the way because people, even though they were coming down and recreationally playing and saying how good's this and having a beer after it, you still get your players who are elite players. They want a pathway. They want to be competitive. And so now we've got the New South Wales State Cup, junior and senior. You've got the Queensland the same, junior and senior state cups. Then we go on to the Australian Championships at the end of the year. And we've got where all the little associations form into regions. So there might be 6 associations form into a region. From that, we pick our Australian teams. They go on to play over Trans-Tasmans in New Zealand. We've had Tag World Cups. We just finished the Tag World Cup this year in August, was over in Limerick, Ireland. You've got this game being played in South Africa, Ireland, England, France, Hong Kong, and it's starting to grow in other areas. Italy and a few others are just starting to start up. So it's a very popular sport now and it's becoming worldwide. So if you just want to be a recreational player, go down to your local area and play. But then again, if you want to be competitive and make it to the top, you now have that opportunity as well.
That's amazing. There's sort of something for everyone with all those different levels that you can play at. How do we fare on the sort of international stage against those other countries that are competing?
We're dominating. Australia's always dominated, and I think, one, we were the first country to start playing Oztag, and then two, we're such from that rugby league background and all that sort of thing. I think that's where we're probably the dominant country, and I think just in the last one we had 14 divisions. I think we took out 12 of them, 12 or 13 of the divisions, and so that's happened in the last couple of World Cups. 2018 we had in Coffs Harbour, 2015 we're up at the Sunshine Coast, and 2012 we're over in Auckland, New Zealand. So it's every 3 years, but Australia is still dominant, but we've noticed a big difference in the other areas, the other countries, who now say, well, this is what we've got to do to compete against the Aussies. And we can just see a significant difference in the ability every 3 years.
All right, Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Clearly we're on top of the world in Oztag, which we love to see. Much better than the English who create sports and then watch Australia overtake them. We've created a sport and continue to dominate at it. So that is fantastic. Bill, I just want to backtrack a little bit. We were talking about the footprint that Oztag has in different states around Australia and how it maybe doesn't have the same footprint in the AFL-dominated states. Has there ever been any effort to sort of increase the footprint in those states, specifically, I suppose, South Australia, Victoria and Western Australia?
Well, when we noticed that the Oztag was struggling down there and really it was really hard. You usually had people who may have moved to South Australia that lived up here and played Oztag and go down there and think, oh, well, I've got to look around for it. So they're only little boutiques. But a very good mate of mine was David Yole, who was the New South Wales Director of Umpires. I'm going back into the late 90s. And I was talking with him and we put our heads together and we came up with a version of Footy Tag, which was an AFL version with a bit of Oztag in it and a bit of, say, NFL in the American football where they catch the ball from a pass. Well, we started thinking, okay, if we can get onto rectangular fields, we could have this game of Footy Tag, which has still got the skills of a handball pass, the kicking, but to score a goal, rather than kicking it through the posts, they were taking a mark in the in-goal area. And so we wrote this and we got a few significant people. One of them was Plugger Lockett involved in the early stage of this, and we put a little video package highlights together. And we got it as far as when we started to promote it to significant people within the New South Wales AFL and the VFL and so on. And it was quickly knocked on the head. And so we thought, okay, we had this version, we had the shirts made up, and we thought this is pretty good and we could get this into the market. But we got knocked on the head pretty quick as being a couple of laid-back rugby league people. What the hell would they know about AFL? Well,
you hear about code wars around Australia in our different sports, and that is one of the best examples you'll ever hear. You get someone as big as Plugger Lockett on board, no bigger name in football at that time, in Aussie rules football. You get him on board, you would think there would be plenty of momentum, but obviously the AFL weren't as keen to introduce that and create another code to compete with. But that sounds like it would have been a lot of fun. It's a real shame that didn't take off.
Yeah, I think a fellow by the name of Andrew Dimitri, I think, was the one that said, that's not happening.
All right, and Andrew Demetrio. No surprises there. He was very protective of his sport when he was in charge of the AFL, but who knows? There's a new commissioner coming in, a new CEO rather, I think starting next season, so it might be time to try again.
We're growing that big with Oztag and everything, I just don't think I'd have the time and effort to even think about doing that again. It's the growth of our sport has been very significant. I think they put us especially with the youth, just second behind football, soccer, and so we've got our hands full now, just keeping pace with what we've got.
Yeah, amazing. It's clearly like I said earlier, a much, much, much bigger sport than I was aware of, and probably most people in my state of South Australia being an AFL state. But it is clearly a huge sport all around Australia. To be second behind only soccer for youth involvement is just a fantastic effort. And let's touch a little bit more on how serious the sport actually is. Like I said, it's not just a social sport or anything like that. The rule book is 27 pages long. It's very extensive.
It is very extensive. It's a very difficult read too because it's small print. It doesn't have any pictures in it. But we do, because the game, it can be so intricate that we have to cover all bases when it comes to writing the rules of it because there's so many little things in it. So every rule is covered. Every little thing is covered in it. And that, again, comes from my background when I helped Perry write the rules. So we've just tweaked it as the years go on. We're still tweaking it today when we just see how the game has changed and the game has grown and it just keeps rolling on. So little things happen and I think, well, okay, we've got to fix that or we've got to use this one because that could actually enhance the game. And so we still tweak it, still review the book every year and then we tweak it if we have to. But again, I won't change something because I want to know what the impact and ramifications are of a change because as soon as you tweak or change something, it'll have an impact in another area. But it is, as you said, you can join it and you can just play recreationally and have a beer with your mates afterwards. The parents love it because when they bring their kids down, there's no 2 times a week training and then on the weekend. You might have a game on the Wednesday, bring them down for their 40 minutes, they run around, have a good time and go home. End of story. So that's how good it is for them. And then you get the players that want to go on. Well, then mum and dad have to be invested because now they will take them to training probably once a week in the build-up or the 3 months leading into one of those tournaments, which we hold up at a fantastic venue in Coffs Harbour.
Yeah, amazing. And there really, really is something for everyone in this sport, regardless of your sort of age or ability. It sounds like you really can get in and have a good time playing it. Bill, you're the tournament director of Oztag Australia, so I've had a look at your calendar and it is absolutely chock-a-block, so many different age groups and abilities, like I said. So what have been some of the highlights as of late in the world of Oztag?
Well, as of late, we had a terrific Tag World Cup. Although our numbers were down, obviously, because we're travelling up to the Northern Hemisphere compared to when we've had 3 of them in the Southern Hemisphere, it was still, there was probably half the size, but it was still, we stayed at the Limerick University, so it was like an Olympic village, Olympic campus, Olympic field, all the players staying in the one spot. It was still very competitive, so it was a fantastic tournament. And then we just go back 12 months ago when we went through that pandemic and lockdown, we couldn't fly. That World Cup in Limerick was supposed to be in 2021. And when we couldn't, we didn't know where we were going or what we were doing. I come up with this idea, why don't we have an international tag series where teams representing their heritage and everything from your country, because we wouldn't have to fly, play in a sort of similar Tag World Cup, but within your own country. So New Zealand does it, England, Ireland does it, and we do it here in Australia at the same weekend. So we did that in August in 2022, and we still rate that as probably one of our top 5 tournaments that we've ever had. It just went off really well accepted. We had 160-odd teams playing, representing all their heritage countries, Italy, Malta, Vietnam, and so on. So that was probably one of our highlights. And just recently we had the Australian Senior and Junior Championships. So that Junior Championships back in October, we also rate as one of our top 5 tournaments that we've ever had.
Lots of great stuff going on, and it really is amazing that you're able to send teams over to the Northern Hemisphere to travel that far and take on other nations. It really is spectacular that pathway is there for young players. What else is on the horizon that you're looking forward to? Right
now, you'd think I've got a little bit of a break coming into Christmas, but I don't, because we kick off on the first weekend in February, or the second weekend in February. We've got the Junior New South Wales State Cup. That's the under-9s and under-10s. And then 2 weeks later, we're back up in Coffs Harbour with the under-11s through to 17s New South Wales State Cup. That is our biggest tournament that we run. That is like organised chaos with the amount of people that hit Coffs Harbour, and we play over the 3 days. And the other good thing about next year is our State of Origin is back on the calendar. It's been missing for 7 years for various reasons, but it's now back on in September every year, back in Coffs Harbour, so we're sort of halfway between Sydney and Brisbane. And again, as I mentioned, it's probably the best venue you can play at. I've got access to over 36 fields. Half of them I can play on, even if it's torrential rain. It's just a great venue with a big grandstand, and State of Origin is back on. So we're looking forward to that next year. And we will also be running another invitational challenge where Australia invites all those heritage countries to come back and play us. And that'll be on in August up in Coffs Harbour as well.
All right, heaps and heaps on the agenda in the coming few months for Oztag, and Coffs Harbour, beautiful part of the world. Hopefully everyone can get along and check out the Big Banana while they're there, but that's going to be a sensational tournament, and as all the other tournaments going on, so there is plenty on the horizon. And you said there's lots of representative teams and international travels, and we do fare quite well on the national stage, but do you feel that the other countries are catching up to us the more we go?
They certainly are. Just one point before I talk about that too, Dan. On the last day, on our main field, Field 1, we live stream every game on the day. So that's all your quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals. So you are seeing the best of the best there playing. So it's 3 cameras covering it, replays, full commentary, and we do that every tournament as well. Now, going on to talking about the other countries coming up to speed, sometimes when you're travelling, because you've got your best players might be hindered with can't get time off work, can't afford it, family, whatever the reason may be. When you travel to a place like we do a Trans-Tasman, and that will happen in 2025, we're going back over to play New Zealand. Because they're at home, they will pick their best team. And so when the Aussies get over there and we're playing them, that's when we get some really good competition because they've got their best team on the paddock compared to when they travel, and some of their best players may not be able to travel for whatever reason. So when we find that we go to the country, whether it's England, Ireland or New Zealand, we find we come up against their best players, and that's when we can really tell what they've done in the last 3 years and how well their talent is now.
Sensational. That's a really good challenge to be able to come up against the best of the best, and I'm sure it is vastly different, of course, when not everyone can afford to bring their best teams due to all sorts of circumstances. And that sort of ties in with something else I wanted to ask you. Is your sport on the government's radar at all? Obviously, a handful of sports seem to get about 99% of the sport and rec funding in this country, and then everyone else is sort of left fighting for those other scraps and fending for themselves. So, yeah, how does Oztag go with government funding and assistance and, yeah, especially trying to get players overseas to play in those international tournaments?
The government and everything's aware of us. They know the sport hands down. I know a lot of people even play it who are involved in government and that sort of thing. The unfortunate thing for us is because the way we're structured, we can't get government funding. Whereas you might have a sport that you've got a panel of volunteers and they're out there, and so that club puts in for grants and that sort of thing. Because of our structure, we can't do that. So we've always tried and said, okay, well, what do we need to do so that we can get involved in that? Because you've got to take notice of us. The sport is so popular. So many people are playing it. Why wouldn't you try and help us invest in that game to get more kids playing? And one of the good things that the government did do, the former Liberal government and then the Labor government that's in-house now here in New South Wales has tried to continue it, although at one stage they were going to knock it all on the head, is the active kids vouchers. And when they did that, I'm not sure whether you got them in South Australia, but it was $100 for every child that was going to school for sport or creativity. So if they wanted to play guitar or do some dancing or whatever, they would get $100 twice a year to go and help them play that sport. And obviously the government's benefits out of that was all these kids playing sport and hopefully in the long term, less health problems. So that's one of the things that we were allowed to accept those, even though they weren't happy with the structure and everything else and we couldn't get grants. We were a sport that was allowed to accept those government vouchers. And that was a significant difference in quite a lot of the areas, helping in the growth. And this year when the Labor government came in and said we might have to can that due to budgetary constraints, all sports went and rallied and said, you don't really realise how good these vouchers are and how many kids are participating where their families couldn't afford it, and now they can. So don't do that to us. And they're back on the radar. They're only $50, but they're still there and they're back on the radar.
Very important to incentivise getting kids involved in sport for a very large number of reasons. Couldn't agree more. And you actually have an Australian Oztag Hall of Fame and inducted a few new members in September. 23 Hall of Famers in total, so it is a very exclusive group featuring players, coaches, administrators, and even a referee. And it's really good to see the sport honouring those who make it tick. Can you tell us a bit about the most recent trio of inductees?
Yeah, that's a little bit out of my area because obviously, even though I'm the general manager, I'm aware of it all. But we actually have a person who looks after that part of the area. But it always comes down to the criteria of have they been involved? How long have they been involved in the sport? So it's any more than 10 years involved in the sport. What have they done in the sport? What's their contribution, obviously? And when that's all taken to the committee who look after who is going to be considered and then who is going to be inducted, they go through all of that because sometimes there are quite a few nominations, and so they have to obviously weed out. Everybody's obviously capable of being there, and maybe one day we'll get there, but they've still got to go through that process and say, okay, if we're going to only induct 2 or 3, who are the best? And so that's again what they did, but exactly what those 3 did, I can't tell you exactly what it is, except that they've been involved in coaching and playing and representing Australia for a number of years.
Well, I think it's great that you've got a Hall of Fame to honour those who have made significant contributions to the sport. So I really enjoyed seeing that on your website. And of course, flag football is going to be an Olympic sport in 2028, a heavy American influence on that sport, of course, for the Games in Los Angeles. Do you think Oztag could be featured at the 2032 Olympics back here in Australia?
Oh, it would be big, Dan. It's been thrown around years ago. It was thrown around, and one of the things that Perry said was, how good would it be if we could see Oztag at the Commonwealth Games? Back then, I just thought, you know what, that's probably pie in the sky. It's a dream. But dreams can come true. So we've never, ever said that one day we might not be there. One day we could be there. We could be in the Commonwealth Games. We might make the Olympics. At the moment, the Olympics is a worldwide thing, and we probably aren't up there yet. But as I said, England, Ireland, they've both got over 20,000 players playing in both those countries. France is getting bigger. They brought 8 teams over to the World Cup this year. 2 teams back in 2018, I think 2 teams in 2015. But they had to make that long journey to the Southern Hemisphere. But I think as the countries start to take it on board and it grows more and more, there would be an opportunity to say, well, why can't it be in there? Why could this not be a part of an Olympics Games? And it would be that popular. So we'll never say never.
That's it. Never say never, and certainly making the right steps to get there with the game growing rapidly year on year. I want to ask you as well about the sort of touch element of this game, or the tag element. Obviously, there's no tackling. That naturally lessens the risk of concussion, which is becoming a more and more significant issue in pretty much every sport in the world, but I would say rugby, both league and union, is probably one of the more significant sports that's having issues with that. Obviously, there's a lot of sort of barreling into people head first, and it's pretty easy to get a head knock. So naturally, this is a great alternative for people who are a bit worried about concussion and want to protect their heads.
It is, Dan. We see a lot, especially in the kids. A lot of the parents don't want their kids to play tackle because of the knocks and getting hurt, and so they're turning to playing Oztag. And even the NRL, the National Rugby League, has got some kids playing now. They've given them an option to play either tackle or a version called league tag, which is virtually Oztag on a large field, on a full-size field. And they're playing that because they're aware that the game is getting so strong, hard and tough when you're playing the tackle version that there is these issues now with concussion in all these contact sports, and so the non-contact versions are starting to become very popular. We've got a little bit of contact in it where you might bump each other because you're still going in to try and take that tag off the shorts. So that's why we used to say it's a non-contact version of rugby league. Now we say it's a non-tackling version because there are some bumps, just like in basketball. You still get your knocks and you might bump into each other, but you're not going in there and seeing the big whacks and the hits around the head and the concussion. The only time you get a concussion in our game is if there's an unfortunate accidental knock where you've bumped into each other or you may have dived and you've bumped your head on the ground, but you don't certainly get it from the big hits and the big tackles.
Yeah, certainly is a sport with rules to protect against concussion. So I would have to think it will be a very attractive option for people as we keep learning more and more about concussion and, quite frankly, the horrors that it can bring later in life. I definitely think a lot of people will be drawn to Oztag as a really good alternative. And you have some senior comps in Oztag Australia, which we spoke a little bit about earlier, but the sort of over 40, over 50 age groups. Do you see former NRL players or Wallaby stars or any high-level rugby players transitioning into Oztag, into their twilight years for something a little bit less rough and maybe a little bit more social for them than a professional career?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've said this numerous times at our tournaments. I would love to get up there on the PA and say, right, could all former NRL players who are here playing this weekend come out the front onto the main field? I wouldn't do it because obviously a lot of the players would be saying, I'm not going to do that, Bill, they're an embarrassment, or, that we don't want to do that. We just want to get on and play. But if I did do that and they all came out, it would make one hell of a team. If you went, have a look at these blokes that are playing Oztag now, who are former players, and if you put them all together, that would make one really classy NRL team back in the day when they were playing. That's how good it would be. And then when you go to like the juniors, just recently, Cody Walker was up there watching, Brett Kamali. You can start rattling off the names. Matty Geyer, Mark Geyer, probably the names that wouldn't mean a lot to people from the AFL areas. But if you were to say drop a few of those names here in New South Wales, Queensland, everyone goes, oh yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. The list is endless of ex-NRL that are up there either watching in the juniors because they're watching their sons, daughters, nephews, nieces play. And then again, when you go to the seniors, some of the old fellas that are still out there running around playing who were former first-grade players.
That's amazing. Well, clearly this is a sport taking the country and the world by storm, and especially the rugby league and rugby union communities. And yeah, that's really great to hear. Bill, thank you very much for your time today. You've given me more of your time than I could have wished, so I really appreciate that. I will let you go, but before you do go, for any listeners who want to learn more about Oztag, as if I think you've pretty much covered everything there is to cover, but for anyone who does want to learn more or get involved themselves, where would you direct those people to go?
Go to that website, which is oztag.com.au. That's probably your first point of call. On there, if you're looking to play, then there is a contact list of all the areas that are playing the game, and that includes WA down in Victoria. And then there's also our socials where we've got Instagram and Facebook. You'll find us, if you look up Australian Oztag, you'll find us on all those. So we've got a pretty extensive, I've got a full-time person looking after all our socials. So we're pretty active on that. So go to any of those sites and you'll find us.
All right, jump on those sites if you're keen to get involved or just to learn more. Bill, thank you again very, very much for your time today. It has been great chatting to you and learning about this sport, which I knew very little about before we spoke, but now I feel like I'm getting towards being an expert. You've been very in-depth and it's been great having you on the show, and hopefully you're keen to come back on another time because I'd love to keep following Oztag.
It's been a pleasure, Dan. Anytime.